and share my screen. So this is our second meeting. We've got a lot to update you on today and to get through. Our agenda is we'll keep our intros relatively brief this morning. We've got about 5 updates we wanted to share with you related to Vision Zero. We thought we'd give you a recap of the public engagement that we've done so far in the last few months since our last meeting. Lucy's going to talk through some of the work that she's been doing and will be doing on the analyzing the crash data and what the next steps are in that process. And then we'll talk about overall next steps for the project. And then these meetings are also open to the public. So if there's any public comment, we'll take that at the end. So I think with that, maybe we'll just go do a quick round of introductions. I'm Rick Harbison. I'm a planner here at GPCOG, managing the Vision Zero for Rural and Island Communities project. I will pass it to Tegan, and how about we just name an affiliation, and then if you can pass it along to someone else, that'd be great.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Tegan. I'm the Communications and Engagement Coordinator with the Greater Portland Council of Governments, and I will pass it to Bob.
Yeah, I'm Bob Skeen. I'm the Director of the Office of Safety and Mobility at Maine DOT, and I'll pass it to Kurt.
I am Kurt, I'm Public Safety Director for the Town of Gray. Next up will be Lucy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy. I am a data analyst here at GPCOG, and I'm working with Rick on the Vision Zero project. I will pass it to Tony Ward.
Hi, I'm Tony Ward. I'm the town manager with Casco, and I'll pass it to Ann.
Hi, Ann Gass. I serve on the council in Gray, and I'll pass it to Chief Phil Jones.
Phil Jones, Chief of Police in Bridgeton, Maine. I'll pass it to Joshua Bradford.
I'm Josh Bradford. I'm the Chief Safety Officer for Regional Transportation Program. I'll pass it over to Emily.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Emily Ham, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager with Greater Portland Council of Governments. And I'm not sure who hasn't gone. Has Ann introduced herself? Yes.
Yes.
Raise your hand if you haven't introduced yourself. Great. I'll pass it to Bob.
Bob Ernest, I'm on the select board with Town of Sheboygan. And pass it to Bicycle Coalition. I don't know your name, sorry.
Oh, hi, good morning. Sorry, I'll change my name. I'm Jean Sedaris. I'm the Executive Director of the Bicycle Coalition of Maine, and I'll pass it to Alexis.
Hi, everyone. Alexis Guy. I'm the Healthy Eating Active Living team lead at Cumberland County Public Health.
Awesome. I think that's everybody, right? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. I did figure out how to do the chat feature for this meeting today. So if you, can you all see my screen? In the chat feature, there's, so we're going to do some updates, just some project updates, some Safe Streets for All updates, some kind of Vision Zero adjacent updates. But in the chat feature, we uploaded a bunch of documents related to these updates in that folder. So feel free to check it out. First update is that we were successful in the Safe Streets and Roads for All Round 2 grant. So I sent an email announcement about it prior to the holidays. And we just wanted to follow up with more information. It's a little hard to read on this screen, but in that document, if you wanted to scroll through, you could see the entire work plan for everything we're doing. There's essentially 9 or 10 demonstration projects that we'll be working on with the Bike Coalition of Maine and the municipalities that they're in. And also some supplemental planning activities. So there's a couple of road safety audits proposed in South Portland, which is one of the equity zones. And then I'm excited about this one. We're going to do a region-wide roundabout feasibility study. And then we're going to do a couple more in-depth intersection studies for some of the intersections that in the Vision Zero plan really rose to the top in terms of safety concerns and like complicatedness. That's not a word, but the complexity of those intersections.
Hey,
So
Rick,
yeah,
you're
go
not
ahead.
in presenter mode, so it's harder to see the screen.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I didn't
Yeah.
know if that was intentional or not.
No, thanks for
There we go.
a little better, but in that there's a Google Doc in there. If you just click on update one, you can see the whole list of stuff that we're doing and the project narrative and the budget and all that. It's coming out to be about an $800,000 grant. So really excited about that. It's outside of this region, but I think it's encouraging just to know that, you know, we've been successful so far in these grants, and it gives you some good ideas to build upon for this region. The next update is that there was an announcement or an email that went around that so for round 3 of Safe Streets for All, the notice of funding opportunity is expected to open in February. Last year, the notice of funding for round 2 was in March, and then the application deadline was July 10th. So we're hoping that the application deadline will still be in the July range for 2024. But we are kind of keeping our eyes out for that NOFO in February. But, you know, it's just good to know that things are happening, and we got to make sure we keep our eyes on this one in case it is potential that the deadline is sooner than July. We're working on a pretty tight timeline for this project if we want to be eligible for a round 3 grant. This one's sort of Vision Zero adjacent, but I just wanted to mention that Lucy and I went to the Maine Transportation Conference early December. There were a couple sessions that were really relevant to the Vision Zero work. And I was able to track down the PowerPoints for these. So if you wanted to take a look, they're also in that Google folder. There was a presentation from an engineer for the city of Carmel, Indiana. So if you haven't heard of Carmel, it's known as the roundabout capital of the US, I believe. So they have about 170 roundabouts. A lot of them have been built in the last 20 years. So it was really interesting. The engineer talked, you know, all about their experiences with roundabouts, the safety benefits, the other benefits, environmental benefits, aesthetic benefits. So that was neat. There was a presentation about rural roundabouts and all-way stop control in North Carolina. So that was like very much related to this work. Lucy and I were both like wrapped in attention. This is a engineer from North Carolina DOT, and they have a big initiative to improve the safety of their rural intersections. So she talked all about how they're converting a lot of their rural intersections to roundabouts. And then for the ones that they're not converting to roundabouts, they're converting to two-way stops to all-way stops. And she talked about really some impressive numbers in terms of the reduction in crashes. A lot of them were like 50 to 60% reductions. Main takeaways from that I recall are that they really did like roundabouts as the best option, but they are fairly expensive and do take time to build. So they were really pushing all-way stops, converting two-way stops to all-way stops as being just as safe as roundabouts, but also a lot more cost-effective. Like the number she gave was that an all-way stop is about $30,000 to install, and you can do it in a year, whereas the roundabout is maybe 3 years, 1 to 3 million, depending on the complexity. So they're pushing all-way stops, and then as intersections are a little bit more complex, they're considering roundabouts on like more selective scenarios. And then so those Bob is actually the moderator for that, so nice job, Bob. And then there was another presentation by Steve Landry, who's the Maine DOT's state traffic engineer, and that was on the 85th percentile speed, so how Maine DOT sets speed limits. And so the 85th percentile speed, the definition is like it's the speed at or below which 85% of drivers will operate on open roads in favorable conditions. And it's been criticized for a long time now as kind of an outdated way to inform speed limits. And so Steve's presentation was all about how Maine DOT is in the process of revising how it sets speed limits to incorporate lots of other factors and surrounding land uses in the context of the road. One of the highlights for me in his presentation was that they mentioned that they're exploring looking at 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in neighborhood zones. So that was neat to see. And then wanted to mention that this is a little technical, but important. There's the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. It's called the MUTCD. There was an update to it, so it's now in its 11th edition. The update was in December. It's been administered by Federal Highway since 1971. It's a compilation of national standards. It's primarily for road markings, signs, and traffic signals. The document itself is huge. It's over 1,000 pages. The last update was in 2009. And so this new update, speaking of 85th percentile, it eliminates the use of 85th percentile as the primary factor for setting speed limits. And then it also provides guidance on separated bike lanes, it provides guidance on green and red pavement markings for bikes and buses, for rectangular rapid flashing beacons. So those are the crosswalks where mid-block crossings where you hit the button and you have the flashing beacons to help you cross. So none of that was in the previous manual. And I just found this slide here from the National Association of City Transportation Officials, just showing like the previous edition of the MUTCD. This image on the left was technically not allowed, whereas the image on the right is allowed. And so, I think the big takeaways on the update here is that it's a step in the right direction, that they're updating the manual with some more modern and current best practices, and hopefully removing some of the barriers to safe road design. I have not looked through the entire 1,000 pages, but I added an article to that Google Docs folder if you want to take a peek at some of the highlights of changes that have been made. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention that we have this pilot project that we're starting here in Portland. We're partnering with a company called Viva City. They're based in the UK, and they're beginning to expand their operations to the US. They've got a big contract with New York City, and they have these camera sensors that are powered by AI that you set up at an intersection for a prolonged period of time, usually a year or more, and they can detect near misses and just dangerous crash behaviors and trends. And so we have a small pilot project to install 2 of these cameras at Allen's Corner in Portland for a year, and then we're going to move them to another intersection, probably in Scarborough next year. And this is slide from their overview presentation that they shared with us, just showing how it works, how it sees cars and the different scenarios that it can detect. So it's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to, we're having a meeting about it tomorrow, actually. I'm looking forward to seeing the results, and if it works, hopefully we can expand this kind of technology to other, more complicated intersections in the region. So that's all I've got for updates. If does anyone have any questions about any of that, or have an update of your own?
This is Ann Gass. I'll just mention, yeah, I just, we had heard also that MDOT was going to upgrade, the way that it sets speed limits in town centers and villages around the state. Initially, we'd heard that they were going to be ready with that in December. Obviously they didn't get it done. They're now saying January, but I was just curious, I see Bob Skian has, replied to me. So, but I was just curious if Steve had provided you with any sort of something written, but looks like Bob's going to respond.
Yeah, go for it, Bob.
Sure. DOT's been working on this for a while now. Part of the thing that we've come to realize is, we haven't really been telling our story very well. I mean, we haven't really used the 85th percentile for a very long time. There's a misperception that that's all that was considered in setting speed limits over the past few years, when we have been using things like US limits too. And I think that was part of what Steve was talking about in his presentation, is trying to clear some of that misinformation up. What we are moving towards now, in the new policy that will be coming out and procedures, is a more formalized consideration of context. So he gave some examples of, like, Florida has a policy out now that gives some pretty good examples of, suburban versus rural versus urban core, and so we're trying to determine exactly what we're going to be using for context classifications right now, and how that fits Maine communities, which is, it's very different than something like Florida with larger, dense, urbanized areas, in sprawling urbanized areas. So there's a lot of good work being done both by the Bureau of Planning, Traffic Engineering, the Office of Safety and Mobility. I'm on that as well, and it's being led by the Chief Engineer, Joyce Taylor. We're hopeful to have that work done in the spring. That's the latest I've heard. We had a meeting yesterday, actually. Part of this is determining the context definitions, and then having that shown on a map in some way, so that practitioners can look at the map for the area and determine what is appropriate. Plus, we're also developing some tools that can be used, that that are kind of transparent, so that you can put things in and it'll tell you whether, whoever is setting the speed limit, of whether the road as it currently exists today, if the speed that you're looking for is reasonable or not, or if additional modifications to the infrastructure might be warranted to influence driver behavior. Because we know that just simply changing the number on the sign is not going to affect the behavior of the drivers. That's very well known, from lots of research. So we're recognizing and understanding that we need to adjust the context of the, as part of the context definitions, we need to change features of the road, whether that be narrowing, whether that be, other traffic calming type installations, and features. And so all of this is hopefully going to be coming out together, which is kind of why it's taking, till spring. is because we want to release that along with the updated complete streets policy, which is it's another one on another committee that I'm on. Both of those are being looked at in concert. But we want to make sure that we at least have a preliminary map so that, you know, our region traffic engineers who do the speed studies, you know, have a place to start looking at, okay, well, our first pass of this was, this looks like a commercial district, or this looks like a rural residential, or whatever those final context definitions are. So I hope that helps explain where we are on it. And that there's a lot of integral parts with other policies and procedures that are also being reviewed. So we're hopeful to have that out certainly in the early part of this year.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I had a question. Is there like a public comment period at all or review period, or?
I don't know exactly how that part of the process is going to work.
Yeah.
First, you know, we'll have a review amongst our engineering council within Maine DOT. I would assume that our MPO partners will also be asked their opinion. But I'd have to double check to find out exactly how that's all going to work with regards to the public comment. I know, you know, it's this things like the context mapping we haven't done before, and so we're trying to figure out the best way to do it as quickly and reasonably as possible. Obviously, when you're looking at the entire state, you know, with what do we have, 14,000 miles of highway, public highway in the state, and each of those sections are in, you know, some of them will be, a lot of them will be rural, but some might be like a rural village, which, you know, we're also trying to align policy and appropriate countermeasures for things like our village partnership initiative and community gateways and how to make walkable communities at human scale on high speed, you know, where villages exist on high speed rural highways. And so those are all kind of being considered together so that this tool will take into account all of those types of context. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that we don't put it out there and people are going, well, now what do we do with this? So that's why the tool part is important, you know, to put all the inputs in, like most of the speed setting tools like US Limits 2 and others, where you put in driveway density and you put in all of this other stuff to come up with a recommendation. And if it's not fitting what you're thinking is appropriate, then, you know, how do we change the roadway? And should we change the roadway depending on its function? You know, is it a mobility corridor that's important to economy, that maybe there's only so much that we're going to be able to do on Route 4, for example, you know, which is a heavy trucking route. It's vital to the economy of the state. So those discussions and decisions have to be made as part of this as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for the update on that.
Sure. It's really good work, and it's, you know, it's coming along nicely, and you know, it's going to, I think will allow us a lot more. I feel in discussions I've had with folks that are in various advocacy groups, I think people will be very pleased with it.
Cool. Gene, sorry, you've had your hand up for a while.
That's right. I appreciate the update, Bob, too. I was curious about some of those things. Yeah, a couple of comments on the 85th percentile. I mean, the bike ped advocates were certainly looking for elimination of that in the MUTCD, and it's not what it was. It just was it's no longer the top sort of guideline. I think we'd also like to see the elimination of it at the main level as well. I would, Bob, it's great to hear that those policies are underway. We've been eagerly awaiting many of them as well. I would make a strong case for a public input process. I mean, to your point, the people don't understand how DOT makes decisions, and it can be sort of frustrating when they're looking for like a speed limit drop and not understanding why that didn't happen. And a public process can really help to I mean, hopefully maybe get some useful info, but also just as a way to engage people and open the transparency of how these things are developed and what they actually mean, you know, like you're saying, how would this work in practice and being able to do that. So I would really hope for a public input process. The BCM, of course, is there as a ally in that space to help drive, you know, useful input and good comments into that. So more to follow on that. But my question was on the pilot project of that intersection. So the kind of drawings that were on that slide too were, I think, all bicycle. Is this specific to bike or bike ped, or is it looking at all traffic conflicts in that area? And I assume all that data is going to be recorded, but this is not an enforcement tool. Like, people aren't going to be, you know, given tickets or anything based on the data in there. How are you guys kind of managing that, and sort of what does near miss mean, I guess, in the context of that?
So it's all modes. And I think one of the things they highlight is that they can pick up pedestrians and bicyclists, whereas a lot of other, like, earlier versions of this type of technology could only pick up vehicles, whereas this one picks up bikes and peds. So there were a couple different scenarios, like right hooks or near right hooks, or like close proximity. I forget all the exact scenarios they had, but yeah, apparently it can pick up near misses, and then it can rate them from a level of severity of like, wow, that was really bad, or that was an actual crash, to not as bad, and then can kind of show you the data, you know, in probably like multiple different ways, from, you know, like a week to a month to a year to, you know, you can visualize it by location. They have like tracks of movement tracks of like where the vehicles are moving, where pedestrians are moving through an intersection. The short answer is we're going to find out, because, you know, until we start using it and looking at, you know, what the information dashboard displays, like I don't really have a great answer, like, or even know how effective it is, but we're trying it out. But yeah, it wouldn't be used as an enforcement. Mainly, we're just trying to see if it's accurate, if it provides useful information for, you know, future reviews of the intersection, like modifications, that type of thing. All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen, and we can talk about our public engagement to date. So we had 3 workshops so far, and just want to thank everyone who attended the workshops or helped us promote the workshops. I thought they were really great. We had our first one was in Gray. It was at the public library. It was on a Wednesday night. We had pizza and seltzer waters, and it was probably the best attended of the 3. There maybe 15 or so people. We gave a presentation that was followed by a tabletop activity of, you know, primarily the map, and then also our survey. And it was really helpful. Patrick Adams is the top left picture there. He's on the left-hand side. He's our federal highway grant representative. He was there and answered a lot of questions. So that was a great night. And then we had our workshop in Bridgeton at the public library. It was kind of a rainy Saturday morning. We had donuts and coffee. It was more of a open house atmosphere, which was probably better because that's the bottom right picture. We had kind of a smaller space, so we spoke with people as they came in throughout those 2 hours. Probably met with about a dozen Bridgeton residents, and the folks we met with were really engaged and had lots of ideas and concerns to map. Forgot to take pictures of that one. I've got the one, but probably should have taken more. And then we also had a lunch and learn webinar the following Wednesday from like 12 to 1. So did a shorter version of the presentation. I realized I spoke too long at the gray one, so I trimmed that up a little bit. And then that was followed by a discussion. We probably had about 10 or 12 people attend that. So overall, I thought it was really great. It was just always enjoyed meeting with community members, talking about their concerns. I would say the successful pieces were, I think we helped bring awareness to the project, bring awareness to Vision Zero. I think a lot of people gravitated towards the map, which was great. The survey does take a little bit more time, so I don't think we got as many people filling out the survey. We would kind of direct them to take it online. So I think that's something that we need to continue to do outreach around as our survey. We'll talk about that in a second. And also, I think the bulk of our engagement for this project is going to be online. It's pretty hard to get out and make these meetings for most people. So over the last month and in the next few months, we're really going to try and beef up our outreach efforts online. So I thought I would just share the survey so far, just so you can see where we're at. There's also, I did an export yesterday, so it's not as many respondents, but there's a PDF export in the Google folder. But so far we have 76 responses. You can see some communities are pretty well represented, some aren't. So we don't have any for Chebeague, for Durham, Pownell, Sebago. So we've got a lot of work to do here. And 76 is not really where we want to be honest. I think ideally, if I were to put a goal out there, I think 400 might be a good goal, and then having a minimum of 20 per community, but ideally more. And just looking at some of the responses, how do you typically get around? Driving my own vehicle, walking, followed by getting a ride. This one, the results are interesting so far. It's how safe do you feel in your community while driving, walking, and biking? And so green is very unsafe, and then to the right is, well, that's not applicable, but the next one is very safe. So yeah, it's just interesting. You can see people feel more comfortable driving, walking, and biking, on the other hand, very unsafe or very or somewhat unsafe. And then biking has a little bit more in the not applicable category. Some folks aren't biking, of course. And then have you or someone you know been involved in a traffic crash? About 42% said yes. Oh, sorry. 40, yeah. And then 57% said no. This is kind of interesting to me that for our previous survey, we asked the same question and it was more around 75% had someone that they knew or they'd been involved in a traffic crash themselves. So it could be that we just don't have enough survey responses, or maybe it's just different in this area. We did ask people to share more about their experience, which if you want, you can scroll some of these comments. Some of them are pretty helpful, actually, that identified specific areas in the region, so we can take a closer look at that. And then in the plan, might use some of these as quotes. In terms of top road safety concerns, it's similar to the previous survey we did for the other Vision Zero plan. So speeding, distracted driving, and then this one here is inadequate or missing sidewalks, I believe. Sidewalks and crosswalks. And then erratic and aggressive driving. Primary barriers that keep you from walking and biking: lack of sidewalks, lack of safe roads to bike on. I live too far from my typical destinations. And then the practicality of driving due to carrying items. this was encouraging, encouraging so far. On a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you support the idea of Vision Zero in your community? So vast majority are supportive of Vision Zero. Next highest would be neutral, so folks that probably need some more information. And then we did have a few folks that were staunchly opposed to it. And then this, do you have any suggestions for improving road safety in your community that you would like to share? This has been pretty interesting. I can do a word cloud here. But I think we'll go through this list closer to the end with the more fine-tooth comb, and there's lots of interesting ideas to pull out here. Yeah, it's interesting to hear people's perspectives. It's always my favorite part of a survey, is just the open-ended responses. And we're skewing a little bit towards female participants, a little older, a little more white, which to expect. And then also there's some interesting comments here on, is there anything else you'd like to tell us that we'll go through as well. So if you wanted to check these out, you could look at that survey result PDF. So that is the survey. And then I'm going to pass the screen share over to Lucy if you want to go through the map.
Yeah. So. Yeah, so we haven't gotten a ton of responses on the map yet. We have around 15 points on here so far. And there's a couple spots that are jumping out as having more, you know, like multiple people pinpointing them. In New Gloucester, we have Intervale Road and Cobb's Bridge Road and Gloucester Hill Road. There's four people identified that as a problem area for them. And then down in Sebago, around the intersection of Long Hill Road and Bridgeton Road. And those areas, like, definitely check out with the crash data as well as dangerous spots. And then we also have our community input from the workshops that we're going to input into this map now that the workshops are done. So we do have a lot more points, but we definitely want to work on getting more online as well. And we've sort of changed things around so that now when people finish taking the survey, it takes them straight to this. They don't have to go to it separately. So hopefully that will help a bit. Yeah, we definitely need some help spreading the word about the online map and the survey. And I guess on that note, well, we're just going to go through our efforts to date, what we've done for community engagement. So we did a social media ad for 2 weeks on Facebook that was targeted at the 12 communities, an email blast, virtual outreach. There's been a lot. So we had a item in the Loon Echo newsletter. The Bicycle Coalition of Maine had a Facebook post. The Gray Visions, Gray had a website page on Vision Zero, and the New Gloucester Exchange also had an article on there. And then in-person outreach, Tegan and I went around to some of the communities to drop off note cards and talk with staff at libraries and community centers and town offices, and just try to get the word out. Sorry. Oh, no. There we go. So questions for the advisory panel now. We're really looking to get the word out as much as we can to up this engagement. So are there any Facebook groups that we and/or group members can post to? Any community newsletters that we can submit the survey to, people or organizations that we should be looping in, and just general general need for assistance and help in spreading the word. And I don't know if Tegan has anything else to add about what we've done so far, or what we're looking for.
I think you covered it. Yeah, as Rick said, we're at 76 responses right now, and we'd like to be at around 400. And to answer your question, I don't think there's a hard deadline, but we would like the data sooner rather than later so that we can actually incorporate it into the plan. So I would say that January is our month to really promote the survey and get people to take it. And then after that, if we have responses trickle in, that's fine, but we want most of the data by the end of the month, I think. Rick, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, I'll share our project timeline
Yeah.
a little later on in the meeting, but I think internally, at least, like, we don't have a hard deadline externally. Internally, I think if we could wrap it up by February, end of February,
Okay.
we could probably do that. And then we really need to start drafting the plan and like using the survey results to identify priority locations and that type of thing.
Yeah, and the newsletter would be great. I believe I've contacted Kyle. He's the new communications director in Gray. He's been great, but yeah, a newsletter item would be great. And then Jean, another social media post would be great.
And I think we'll send another email out to this group with all the materials just as a reminder. So if you've already done stuff, don't be offended. We're just trying to just get it out there as much as we can.
Okay. I will continue on. So our next part of the meeting is going to be going through a little bit of the crash data analysis that we've done so far and going over what our next steps with that are going to be. So with the end of the year, we have our complete-ish data, crash data for 2023. There were a total of 936 crashes in the region in 2023. 27 of them were fatal or led to a severe injury, which is an increase from 2022, and not the direction we want to be going in. In the period from 2019 to 2023, which is going to be the data that we're considering in our analysis, there were 90 motorcycle crashes, 9 bicycle crashes, and 21 pedestrian crashes. These, are a relatively smaller number of the crashes, but they tend to be more severe. So there were 7 motorcycle fatalities and 14 motorcycle severe injuries, and 3 pedestrian fatalities and 4 pedestrian severe injuries. While the vulnerable user crashes made up less than 3% of the overall crashes, they account for 26% of fatalities and severe injuries. And every bike and pedestrian crash that was reported led to an injury. We have some heat maps here of the overall region, and then looking at sort of the sub-regions that we have. So the heat map considers fatal and severe crashes, and then has a smaller weight for minor injury crashes, which is how we'll be doing our high injury network that I'm going to be getting to in a second. And then the blue dots are severe injury crashes, and the red dots are fatal crashes. So you can see some some spots jumping out on this map in like the Gray Village area and Naples Causeway. Looking at the Lakes region, Naples Causeway, obviously jumping out there. But then, you know, a lot of other intersections and corridors as well. We have sort of along Route 11 and Casco, down in Sebago, along Long Hill Road and Sebago Road, Harrison Road in Naples as well, and South Bridgeton Road, Route 302 in general. Yeah, so we'll, you know, be looking at that in more detail as well as we proceed. And then in the Gray, New Gloucester, Durham Pownell area, that Gray Village area is jumping out. You can see a lot of those are the minor injury crashes because there's no, none of the blue or red dots here. But still concerning. And then along Shaker Road in Gray and New Gloucester, Route 202 in New Gloucester, and then the intersection of Route 136 and Rabbit Road and Quaker Meeting House Road in Durham is has a higher crash rate as well. And then looking on the islands, we can't really, a little harder to make a heat map because there's just a lot less data. There were 3 crashes that came up, 2 severe injury and 1 fatality over this period. And then there were none on Fry Island. And then going into our next steps. So we'll have 4 components to our data analysis. This is the same as what we did for the last plan. So there's a high injury network, a high risk network, community concerns, and equity. And I'm just going to quickly sort of go through all of those to explain what they are and why we're looking at them. So the first one is our high injury network. And I just put in pictures from our last Vision Zero plan that we did, so you get an idea of what it looks like. So the point of the high injury network is to really look at where the worst crashes have historically happened. So we'll be looking at the data from 2019 to 2023. We use a tool called the Safer Streets Priority Finder that helps us determine the road segments where the most dangerous crashes are happening. So it gives different weights to the crashes depending on severity. Fatal and severe crashes get a weight of 3, and then minor injury crashes get a weight of 1. And then the possible injury crashes and property damage only crashes aren't considered in the analysis. And so that's our first layer that we look at. And then we have a high risk network. So this determines where crashes are likely to occur in the future by looking at different demographic and infrastructure factors. It was inspired by an analysis done by the Kansas City Vision Zero Action Plan. And it compares the rate of fatal and severe injury crashes per mile of road with the regional average for different factors. In our first plan, the factors we considered were equity, functional class of the road, number of lanes, congestion, and speed limit. And the ones that have green in the representation ratio there are roads where, or road types or place types where the crashes are underrepresented. So they're like, those are sort of the areas that we have to worry less about. And then where it's red, those are areas where crashes are overrepresented. And the higher that number is, the more it's associated with higher rates of crashes. And then in this area, we're looking for a little bit of input. We're sort of running into some difficulties with just having a lot less data for the rural communities. So around 2/3 or around a third of the roads that we're considering don't have any speed limit data, which, you know, makes this a little difficult. There's also a lot less variation in the number of lanes, and we have less equity data. I'll get into that in a second. We were thinking that it would still be worthwhile to do this analysis and just symbolize on the map where there's a lack of data. But we wanted to check in with you all and see what you think about that as well.
That seemed like a reasonable approach. Symbolize places where there's no data and run the analysis anyway.
That makes sense to me. I mean, the equity stuff is going to be a little harder to get, and depending on how you're defining that. But I mean, if you're relying on census info, for example, especially more rural areas, it's going to be a little harder to get some of that micro data, level data.
Yeah, that's what I have up next.
Okay.
So we'll get into that a bit.
And we'll follow up with Maine DOT just to make sure that like the file that we have is the most recent, just to double check. I mean, there's not much we can do about the number of lanes or the equity stuff, but for the ones that we do seem to be missing data, we'll make sure we double check that.
I think probably a lot of your where your speed limits are empty are probably are they local roads? Are local roads being considered in here?
They are considered.
So a lot of those probably, a lot of the roads where there is no speed data, it might be because they just fall under the statutory speed limit information. So 25 for urban and 45 rural. Just a thought.
Yeah.
But I know we have others that are collector highways that have no speed data too. So I know we have some problems with the data we have being complete.
Yeah. All right. Well, onto the equity data. Oh, sorry, not quite yet. One more before that we get there. So we already talked about this a decent amount, but the third component that we consider is our community concerns, both from the online map and our workshops, as well as I know the last time around we got some, we went through like social media comments as well and got some locations where people had concerns. And, you know, this just helps us to supplement the crash data and infrastructure data with local knowledge. And just because a crash hasn't happened somewhere doesn't mean that it's not dangerous. And people tend to know a lot about the communities that they live in. So we want to take advantage of that. And then finally, equity. So our last thing that we want to look at is where disadvantaged communities are. The last time around, we used the US DOT Equitable Transportation Communities, which is a tool that is recommended by the Safe Streets for All grant. And there were a few locations in the urban and suburban communities that that were considered equitable transportation communities. Looking at the rural and island communities, there aren't any census tracts in the region that pass the threshold to be considered an equitable transportation community. But we can still look at that data to determine which places in the region have relatively higher levels of disadvantage. So this is a map of that, and those darker blue communities have a higher percentile in the composite score. So the tool considers 5 categories of disadvantage: transportation insecurity, environmental burden, social vulnerability, health vulnerability, and climate and disaster risk burden. And sort of combines all of those. There's like 40 different indicators that it looks at. So it's pretty comprehensive. And those darker blue communities had a higher level of disadvantage. So, yeah, that's the approach that we're going with there. It's a little bit different than the last time around, but I think it does provide some insight. Yeah, Bob. Oh, you're on mute.
Does climate disadvantage consider just impact on roads, or would overall transportation, I'm specifically thinking of unbridged islands and ferries and that kind of thing, would that weigh into those calculations?
I think that would probably weigh in more to the transportation insecurity factor. The climate, or well,
I'm thinking transportation security relative to the fact that boats are over time, boats and piers are the key transportation link for our communities, and that extreme threat. Pretty severe threat today, but extreme over time.
Yeah. I would have to look at the, like, which indicators they look at for the climate and disaster risk burden. I know that for transportation insecurity, they have sort of 3 areas that they look at. There's transportation access. So essentially how long it takes people to get to the places that they need to go to. And some of the island communities were definitely rising to the top with that. Transportation costs, so what percentage of income people are needing to spend on transportation, and transportation safety. So, you know, looking at crash fatality rates per population.
Yeah, transportation costs as a percentage of income would be a huge thing. Because of the extra cost of parking and ferry tickets.
Yeah, so I definitely think that
just if that helps in building out the data.
Yeah, and like I did go through as well and look at like the specific categories of disadvantage and like subcategories that the different towns were disadvantaged in, which was interesting as well. I didn't want to like go too in depth into that during this meeting because I know everyone has limited time, but I'm happy to talk to you about that and share that tool with you as well if you're interested. Yeah, so that's sort of where we're going with the data. And then Rick's going to go into the overall next steps unless anyone has any questions or comments.
Does anybody have any questions about the data so far? Yeah, I just want to mention, so in the plan, we'll have all 4 of those maps. So we'll present those maps and then we'll use each of those layers, the high injury network, high risk, community concerns, the equity maps. We'll use those to develop our priority locations. And then, so we'll actually have like a 5th map that'll be, here are the priority locations that have emerged from this Vision Zero process. Okay. So overall next steps here. This is our big picture project timeline that we have up on the website. We're a little bit delayed, I'd say. So for November, December, we were identifying issues, analyzing crash data. We had our public engagement and stakeholder engagement activities. I think we were initially intending to wrap this up in those 2 months. The more we thought about it, like we wanted to wait on analyzing crash data until the end of 2023 so we can get a full calendar year. So we've pushed that out a little bit. And then we've also pushed out our public and stakeholder engagement, just so we can make sure that we're getting all the communities represented. We have a, more robust participation. So phase 2 has been pushed out a little bit. And then we also are, next steps following that are identifying those priority locations. So using those 4 maps that Lucy just went over to develop the priority safety locations, and then also developing actions and strategies that'll be included in the plan. And then we need to draft the plan and develop a draft plan, and then put it out there, get your thoughts on it, revise it, edit it, all by April. And so this is a little bit more of a detailed timeline for how we can finish the plan by April. And again, the April deadline is to really make sure we're prepared for that round 3 deadline in July, but maybe sooner. So we've got the meetings up top, kind of bookended by our meeting today, and then April 16th is the GPCOG Executive Committee meeting, where we would ultimately present the draft plan and they would adopt it at that meeting, hopefully. And then below is kind of the major tasks that we still need to do. Our thought is we could start drafting the plan now. There's certainly sections like the intro, the background. There's content that we can start developing. So we can keep that going. Extending our online survey and map through February. We'd also like to do some more stakeholder meetings. So I'll talk about that in a second, but really meet with folks that have on the ground experience with, either, designing and building infrastructure projects to, police and fire rescue, just to get a little bit more complete perspective on what are the issues and barriers around safety. And then, set aside some time for the crash data analysis that Lucy reviewed, that identifying the priority locations. And during that time, we could also work on developing strategies and actions. One of the thoughts I had was that with the draft plan, we could develop that in a Google Doc, so it's shared with the group, because I want to make sure that you all are not, I want to make sure you all are included and that we're not developing this plan in like a black box and then presenting it to you at the very end. At the same time, we have a really short timeline. So my thought is we could develop the draft plan in a Google Doc, kind of give you updates when we add things. And then that would allow you all to provide comments, ask questions, kind of see where we're at, what needs to be done. And then my thought was for February, we're going to be pretty deep in all this work, but we could potentially send out some homework in February for you all, some optional homework where I think it'd be helpful to, especially with developing the strategies and actions, to get your thoughts and opinions on that. So we could potentially like have a questionnaire for you to fill out, or we still need to think a little bit more about that, but just ways to get your input on those aspects of the plan. And then our meeting in March would probably be to review an early draft of the plan, and then having some time to make edits and revise it. And then the meeting in April would be to do a final review of the plan in advance of the executive committee meeting. So that's kind of where we're at. It is a pretty condensed timeline. We have a lot of work to do. But anybody have any questions about that, or concerns, suggestions about the timeline? Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, I just had a quick, we kind of went back and forth on this on email, but it, to what degree it make sense for the participating towns to, endorse or somehow weigh in on this plan? And could you talk a little bit about the community involvement there? Because I mean, a number of us would need to sort of, tee that up.
Yeah, that's right. So I think we need to do a little bit of digging with the requirements, but I believe, according to Patrick, that the GPCOG Executive Committee will endorse or adopt the plan. And then I think for future funding, if we were to put together a demonstration project grant, something like that, that the towns would need to adopt the plan as well. So individual towns would need to adopt this plan. And then I feel like there's a little bit of a question whether, because Patrick mentioned that the town would also need to adopt a Vision Zero policy,
Yeah.
specific one. And I'm not totally sure about if the having adopted this plan would suffice. I think Patrick felt like town probably would need to adopt a specific policy. And yeah, I think we have to do a little research around what a specific policy looks like. So far in my just initial digging in, most towns have their own Vision Zero plan for their town or city, and then they adopt that as their plan / policy. So we're in a kind of a unique situation where there's like a regional plan, and is it enough for individual town to adopt that regional plan, or do they need to also adopt a individual policy for that town? So
Right. So in Gray's case, we have both a bike ped plan and a complete streets policy. Would that be sufficient? Because I'm just in Gray, developing a new policy is a kind of a lengthy process. So it's hard. I don't know what it's like in other towns, but we would need some thought, and some to organize staff time and council time to make sure that gets done in the middle of budget season.
yeah. Yeah, I think we need to look into it. Yeah, and hopefully that's the case where it's not a necessity that adopting this plan works. For our round 2 grant, which we were awarded, none of the towns had adopted the Vision Zero plan. The Vision Zero plan was adopted by the PACS Policy Board. So that was, one example where, it wasn't necessary in that example. I'm not sure, maybe if the things have changed for round 3, we'll have to take a close look at that. Maybe we'll know more when the notice of funding comes out in February. Are you all okay with the idea of doing a Google Doc and then being available to do some more in-depth, a little optional homework? And then as far as the stakeholder meetings, we did want to just conduct a little bit more, just do a little bit more stakeholder meetings to meet with folks. Here's our list: is town managers, town engineers, town planners, public works directors, Maine DOT planners, engineers. And then also wanted to meet individually with police and fire EMS personnels, and then community-based organizations. So we've met already with Building Livability in New Gloucester. Deborah, who's not here today, she's on our advisory panel. She is part of that group. And then we met yesterday with Paul Dranon, who is a Westbrook resident who started Vision Zero Maine. So yeah, we're just trying to have as many meetings as we can just to get a better sense of, everyone who's involved with, funding roads, planning, designing roads, implementing projects, responding to crashes. I think it could really help inform the plan and definitely the actions and strategies. So a lot of you are on this list or fit the category. So I think what we'll do is probably start out by reaching out to some of you first. So hopefully that's okay. But you can always say no, but we'll probably send out some invitations or requests to meet in the next week or two. And then also, does anybody have any additions to this list that, or suggestions for people that we should meet? Either a category or specific groups? If you do, feel free to put it in the chat or just chime in.
One thought I had was like, when I've needed to do community outreach about different stuff, I've gone to Rotary clubs or, Lions clubs and things like that. It's kind of labor intensive, but in the rural areas, they tend to not be town by town and more, kind of regional. And it's maybe smaller numbers and an older clientele, but I mean, they'll tell you where they may be not biking so much, but they'll certainly tell you where the unsafe driving or walking might be.
Okay.
And they already, they do all the work of the convening, right? You can just show up and do a presentation and pitch the survey.
Yep. Yeah, we'll check that out.
Are you doing any, well, I guess in this area, there's probably not as high a population of refugees and immigrants. So probably outreach.
Well, that is a good point. A big part of Vision Zero is the equity piece and reaching out to underserved communities. That's a good reminder. I need to get back out there. So I did put some feelers out to a couple food pantries to see if we could table at a food pantry, talk to some of the folks.
Yeah.
But it was around the holidays, and I think those probably emails got lost in the shuffle. But yeah, if anyone has any suggestions for food pantries or other ways to meet with folks who are underserved, vulnerable population groups, that would be really helpful.
Another thought I have are mobile home parks. I think in a lot of towns they're located in difficult areas, and Gray, our largest mobile home park, is next to our transfer station. They literally used to have this huge open pit next to them. I mean, obviously that's not and they are impacted because the road into the transfer station is alongside their park, and the entrances and exits to their park and to the transfer station are a fairly short distance together, and that tends to be a really high traffic area on days when the transfer station is open, because there's also a Hannaford across the street. And so it can be I don't know, Kurt, I don't know if you want to jump on that, because the public works garage is there as well as emergency services. So I just think that can be that's a concentration of would tend to be lower income people who may see some traffic impacts, and perceive equity around issues around access to sidewalks, for example.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Other than validating what you just said, I'm not sure what we're looking for, but you're spot on.
Yeah, made me think. We do have a lot of postcards. Like, we could potentially go door to door in some locations and just leave flyers, talk to folks. And I did put a Facebook post out to the Lakes Region Explorer. There's a Friends of the Lakes Region Explorer Facebook group. So that's the bus that goes from Portland to Bridgeton. So I put a post out on there as well, but I am kind of intrigued about the idea of, doing some more on the ground, boots on the ground outreach to specific neighborhoods.
I'm also thinking about as far as how young people get around and that it might be worth doing outreach, some of those stakeholder conversations with maybe school social workers or folks who work in rec departments who can speak to how young people are or aren't able to get around their communities and
Yeah.
the challenges that families are facing.
That's a great idea.
And you sparked an idea. I'm not sure how tight that community is, but Apple Tree and Meadowview are fairly tight communities that may be worth reaching out to.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
assisted
know,
living or, yeah.
I know Tegan's been in touch with some of the schools. So we're working on that, but I hadn't thought about counselors and rec programs. I think that could be really promising. Yeah, great suggestion. Thank you. I think that's all we've got today. We could end a little bit early. I guess the two things to close out on would be to keep an eye out. We'll send a reminder email with some materials about promoting the survey and the map. And then also we'll send some communications out individually, probably for folks that we'd like to meet with as part of our stakeholder meetings. And then we'll get started on this work. We'll let you know when we post content into the Google Doc. And yeah, we'll take it from there. We'll schedule our next meeting in March. And then we'll also keep you posted. Anything we hear about that notice of funding opportunity, other Vision Zero updates, we'll keep you in the loop.
Just Rick, for a quick question, I know you've mentioned this a couple times, but does the current link to the survey also take you to the map? You said you were going to try and link those. Has that been done yet?
Yeah, so the way that it works now is that once you finish the survey and submit it, it takes you straight to the map.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Just
You can
want to
you can also access the map separately on the website, but it is all in one now.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think in terms of importance, I would emphasize the map more than the survey, maybe. I think the map is really where we're going to be using a lot of the input on, where the concerns are. Would you say that's accurate, Lucy?
Yeah, I mean, like realistically, in what gets used to actually make the decisions around like which roads are, are not more important isn't the right word.
Priority locations.
Priority locations.
Yeah.
That's the data that we use. I think we'll probably try to go through the survey too and pull out specific locations that people mention. But on my end, it's a lot more helpful if people just put the point on the map. Yeah, but it's all important and we will look at it all.
Yeah. All right, thanks for the link, Bob. Thank you all for your time, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.